First is Denise. Okay. Denise Hammond's going to go first. Denise Hammond is the president of CUPE Local 1281. She's a member of the CUPE Ontario Executive Board. She's a longtime feminist and organizer and is interested in how you actually relate struggles inside the workplace and struggles outside the workplace.
Thanks, Sam. So first off, I guess I should say, in terms of my introduction, I specifically identify as a feminist, and I think it's something important and want to encourage folks to reclaim that, because I think acknowledgement is important and identification is important. And in the spirit of acknowledging, I also want to acknowledge that we are here on First Nations land, the land of Mississauga New Credit, and it's a recognition within the land that we are here that this room was actually modeled around. So to take a moment to think about the medicine wheel that's here and the spirits that are here that we are currently occupying. Before diving into a discussion about our challenges and some of the experiences we're talking about, which, you know, tend to be a little bit negative because we're really good at it, I also want to locate myself in a context of being involved in a working class movement, because I am by no means an expert, and in fact, when they asked me to speak, I was a little bit shocked. I thought maybe there was a secret meeting beforehand and they came up with a list of names and couldn't find anyone, but here I am. So hopefully at the end of this, you'll think I have something to say. I started off in the union as a university worker in 1997 and have been involved in the public sector ever since. I became radicalized and involved in the labor movement as a result of both my student activist work and becoming a member of CUPE 3903, where I was a steward and then a picket captain for the 3903 strike in 2000. And I participated in the actions of the local, fought against the employer, and also fought against the media tactics that we've continued to see implored upon unions and our attempts to divide us. But we were very principled. I walked the line, and I saw how a union could operate from both a grassroots, member-driven focus, and be both political in a way that brings people in, but doesn't shame them for being an automatic activist lacking class analysis. Something that I think is important for us to reflect upon. But to be effective, we need to have our internal house in order. And that's, I think, one of the things that we're doing here tonight, is to hold a discussion and be self-critical in terms of where the union movement is at. And today, I'm currently the president of a small composite local of 200 people, representing workplaces with a social justice mandate across southwestern Ontario from Windsor to Ottawa. And with so many active members in our workplaces struggling for change, whether it's fighting imperialism, capitalism, sexism, racism, you'd think that our local would be very kick-ass in leading change. And although I'm not trying to suggest that we are not, because we have many active locals and many active members within our locals, one of the things I find, and a challenge for us, is that many of our members are actually working outside of the union and don't identify as union members. And herein lies a challenge that I see time and time again with our capacity to build a united workers movement, as so many activists play a role as activists seeing them outside of the union. The disconnect between the union and the community is our challenge. We know that our struggle is about community and building a better world for all of us, because the improvements that we gain at the bargaining table or on a picket line help all of us collectively to raise standards and build confidence to fight. But most importantly, there is an interconnection in our struggles, because the state and the agents of capitalism need us to be divided so they can isolate our issues and pit us against each other. It's all too common the way that the media presents both the poor and those accessing welfare and disability benefits, and how it also represents unionized workers. Take, for example, the common argument that we heard when the special diet program was cancelled. It costs too much. It's a waste of tax dollars. It's being abused by selfish, greedy poor trying to get around the system. And think about the same way that unionized workers in the city of Toronto and Windsor were portrayed by the media during the recent strikes. They were presented as greedy, as selfish, costing the system too much, costing taxpayers. And the rhetoric was, why should they get benefits that not everyone has? The portrait, although different frames and different locations, is painted the same way time and time again by the media. We use and abuse the system for our own needs. And successfully, the media and the government have painted both the poor and workers as the problem in this current financial crisis. And even though there is a common fight for survival, we aren't really working together. And most importantly, the unions aren't presenting their struggles as demands within a community struggle. This divide and conquer tactics of the media and the state are also infiltrating into our workplaces. In both the public and the private sector, there's a concerted effort to drive a wedge between workers, namely senior workers and new workers coming in. Think most recently of the steelworkers in Hamilton, who are fighting to maintain the same rights and pension benefits for those workers who are new to be hired. While the social services and university sectors, employers are picking them off one and one, whittling down benefits and protections in smaller workplaces or in workplaces where there's a demobilized membership. We all know the common phrase, an injury to one is an injury to all. So when one group of workers lose, this paves the road for allowing employers to paint other active, organized members and their locals as greedy and uncompromising. But standing up for your rights is not about greed. It's about fairness and defending yourself under capitalism. And no workplace or union that ends up having something removed ever wanted to give it up in the first place. So let's not allow the bosses to convince us otherwise. But in this current context, we also don't have the public on our side of unions. They don't support us in terms of improving working conditions, benefits, and wages. And when we lose support from the community, then it is often in those times that we lose important vital aspects that make our unions vital and energetic. As the role of the employer in the state uses this moment as an opportunity to roll back the clock, the gains that we've all fought hard for, like employment equity, harassment language, pay equity, they're falling off the table, along with job security and increased wages. The government, the employer, and the media have convinced so many in our communities that it's the union and unionized workers who are to blame for the issues, and we are seen also as the only solution. So at this moment, the risk of losing gains that we've made in the past 20 years are at risk, let alone union density and our union survival. Even the Liberals most recently understand this when they wanted to force the public sector wage freeze under the guise of needing more money for public services. But we know that this is all spin, and it's playing into the psyche of those who are struggling to access those vital public services. Because really, when in the hell have the Liberals actually cared about public services? Except for maybe those vague moments when they were the opposition, trying to take on the Tories, painting themselves as the kinder side on the public. Through the reinforcement of capitalism and the alliance of media, governments and employers are pointing their fingers back at unionized workers. But they're pointing them back so they don't have to look at themselves. They've created a blame game, and unfortunately, they're winning quite a bit. But they're winning because for too long, unions have not had a connection to the community or community issues. We don't spend the time building communities and developing relationships, and the role of a union has been minimized and made irrelevant for many because of the perspective that in joining the union, there's little to gain. The attacks on workers and job security have reduced the role of the union as agents for grievances, rather than understanding our role as being a force for change. So therein lies one of labor's biggest challenges. We need to rethink the question of how we bridge the two aspects of community activists and union activists to become a united force against our common enemy, instead of segregating and isolating ourselves. For the past 8 years, I've had the opportunity to work within the student movement. And in thinking about the dynamics of the students' unions, there's a significance that I think is worth commenting on. Now don't worry, I'm not going to talk about people's wages or the aspect of white men dominating spaces. But I think that there's an important aspect of commenting on in terms of a comparison within the union movement. And that is about renewal. Typically every year in the students' union and within students' unions, people come and go. They graduate, they move on. And although often this means you frequently relive the same arguments, and sometimes it feels a little bit like Groundhog Day, reliving the same stories over and over, there's still lots of new energy and ideas that are brought in. Every movement, I believe, needs to find a way to engage, to be creative, and to excite. I don't believe in apathy, but I do believe, however, in disengagement and boredom. And if we're always doing the same kinds of tactics and utilizing the same strategies, we begin to face stagnation. Movements need energy to keep us growing. But to be clear, I'm not advocating that we need to cap elections of leaderships. That's a different argument for another day. But we need to find ways to embrace both new members and new ideas to fight boredom. Equally important, the petty conflicts and arguments that happen between personalities in a student movement can subside when there's change. In the union movement, we've so frequently found small petty differences from years ago continue to plague disputes and hold us back. We spend too much time fighting ourselves as we become disoriented and disorganized. And so 4 challenges that I've tried to put before us tonight to consider and think about are the following. 1, unions have lost relevance in people's lives and in the community. And as we lose what has been gained over the years, when our CA benefits are eroded and scabs cross the line, we also lose our confidence to fight and maintain the struggle. But equally important, we diminish inspiration and hope for others for a fight back. 2, there's a lack of solidarity and support for community battles within our struggles, which has led to union members to be painted as selfish and greedy and disengaged in issues. Conversely, as the union and its rights and benefits are stripped, many workers desire and force us to return to the basic bread and butter issues, and we're losing aspects of equality, equity, and internationalization that make our movement strong. And 3, we're challenged with both disengagement, disempowerment, and collective boredom. So we are in need of a renewal to embrace new ideas, new tactics, and offer spaces to new members. The union movement needs to move faster to embrace the here and now. Let's move beyond the clip art that we're so fond of. We're too critical of each other, and this is our 4th challenge. We allow disputes to cloud and drag upon our capacity to organize. So let's focus on what and who is the problem so that we can find ways to fight together and to win. But in all of these challenges, I know that it's not all bad. It's important that when we're critical in this moment of crisis, we shouldn't just focus on the challenges, because if anything, it's just way too depressing. So, in the spirit of being inspirational, let's remember the means to create change, and that change begins within each of us, with small acts that may at the time seem pointless and insignificant, but these small acts are vital in order to inspire widespread resistance. And as we aim to act, to organize, to agitate, we should be comforted because it's those who hold power that have the most to fear, and it's those of us who have the most to gain. And that possibility for change, for another world to be possible, it requires risks from each of us. So let us take risks and move beyond our comfort zones, move beyond being complacent, and take risk even when the outcome is uncertain. And risks, we need to understand, mean different things for different people. It's important for us to consider each of our needs in building a movement. But our small acts of resistance, both within and outside the union bureaucracy, are necessary and vital to reclaim if we're going to shift the tide of building a workers' movement. And it's important to remember that our acts must have purpose. They can't just be tactics or moments of satisfaction for our personal fetish for the need of struggle. But these acts must inspire and bring in others for the purpose of building a movement. And in these times, like most, our collective building is vital because the aim of capitalists and those who oppress us is really just to isolate and disenfranchise us. This is why some of the best activists and organizers I know are not just about strategy and tactics, but they're about building relationships, developing community, and taking the time to include people. Creating social change and building a movement is just as much about building relationships and developing camaraderie as it is about instigating acts of resistance on the streets and in our workplace. So as we go forth in considering ways to move and how to challenge, to take the risk and incite, let us all remember that it's important to build a movement that includes each one of us and challenges for change.